Hello and welcome to a new episode of Her Voice. When ordinary people are suddenly and inexplicably surrounded by war, life as they know it can cease to exist. They become the collateral damage, all running away from devastation and towards the unknown. But the human face of tragedy is largely depicted in the personal accounts of women and girls who have been forced to flee their homeland under dire circumstances. These circumstances involve women making the most difficult decision of their lives under dangerous conditions and in hostile environments. Imagine a woman suddenly experiencing the loss of her husband and adult male children to war and who is unable to protect her shattered family or herself, who is suffering from hunger-related diseases, whose home has been destroyed, and who is either threatened by or subjected to sexual violence. In such a situation, when she decides to flee, she does so under extreme conditions when she and her children are risking additional tragedies and is often subjected to hidden danger during all stages of her plight. So what happens when life as you know it changes overnight? When your role as a mother, wife, sister or daughter suddenly switches to that of the main provider and head of the household? How do you cope when thrust into an uncertain terrain that leaves you exposed to unfamiliar risks and struggling just to make it through the day? And how do you rebuild your children's traumatized life if you're fortunate enough to have your family intact? Before we begin our discussion, let's watch this report that highlights the agonizing struggle of women refugees fleeing destruction and terror.
To look at the images of refugees fleeing from the Middle East and North Africa, you could have been forgiven for thinking that the average age in these countries is about 10. The body of 3-year-old Aylin changed the media narrative of this crisis, and many more poignant images have been circulated. We have seen children clambering through the windows to board packed trains in Macedonia, and a couple cradling their baby after desperately throwing themselves on the train tracks as police try to take them to migrant camps in Hungary. These images have caused a lot of pain around the world, especially with scenes of women carrying their young ones while attempting to cross the dangerous waters of the Mediterranean, seeking refuge in a safe haven. Women are the sole providers for 1 in 4 Syrian refugee families, struggling to provide food and shelter for their children, and often facing harassment, humiliation and isolation, according to a report from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. More than 145,000 Syrian families now living in Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq and Jordan are led by women, it says. The civil war in Syria has torn apart families and communities, forcing almost 3 million people, mostly women and children, to flee the country. Refugee women are struggling to make ends meet in an unfamiliar and sometimes hostile environment. Many face a double trauma, the pain of losing or being separated from their families, coupled with the distress of living in exile alone. When survival means leaving everything behind, women refugees often bring only the clothes on their backs and the physical and mental scars of what was left behind. Post-traumatic stress disorder, the psychological aftermath of trauma, can be devastating. The worry about how their children's lives had changed and the emotional distress they had suffered often means that these women are vulnerable. Without regular income, female-headed families often rely on negative coping mechanisms such as child labour, which prevents children, especially boys, from attending school. Some found their children were growing up too fast, that they had seen too much and taken too much weight on their shoulders. They said their boys in particular had taken to acting like little men, trying to help their mothers by getting jobs, running errands, or assuming the protective demeanour of an adult. Girls were forced to assume additional responsibilities too, such as taking care of siblings and doing more chores at home, while others find themselves forced into marriages at a very young age.
Now, to give us a more detailed insight into the women refugee crisis in Europe, I have with me in the studio Mr. Fred Morlet, co-founder and executive director of the Volunteer Coordination Agency, and Brendan Woodhouse, he's a firefighter, and he's also a volunteer at Lighthouse Relief in Lesbos. Both of our guests, as well as other guests that will be joining us in the show, are the heroes behind the scenes that work endlessly to help with the refugee crisis in Europe. So welcome to the show, gentlemen. Fred, can you tell us more about HCSA and when was it founded and what important role does it have, especially towards helping refugees in Europe?
Well, in fact, it's a very long story because I had my first experience with refugee 26 years ago when the Berlin Wall came down. So for me, it was something very specific. My grandfather was a refugee from Russia. Right. So we have in the blood, in the family, the refugee issue. 1 year ago, I was volunteering for UNICEF in Spain, and I saw every day on the television what happened in Turkey, in Greece, in Libya, in Italy, and I decided last June to come to Lesbos and to volunteer with my wife and a friend. So we stayed there, and it was a very nice story because we were the first person on the ground. At this time, there were no camp management, no UNHCR, no Red Cross. Nobody was there. I was interacting directly with the people, distributing soap, shampoo, giving some wash advices. So it was a very nice experience. And more the people came to me and said, we would be very happy, very honored to join you. So I created a couple of months ago VCA International, now relayed by HSA. It's a humanitarian support agency. We professionalized our experience, and now we are working closer with the UNHCR, with Oxfam, Save the Children, IRC, and the other organization on the ground.
Right. Okay. Now, Brendan, you work as a volunteer with Lighthouse Relief. This is something that I found out about you, and you decided to sort of volunteer and take on this as a job, more like maybe full-time job in a way. You have a touching story that you kindly actually shared with myself about the rescue at Caracas, which was on the 23rd of December last year. Could you please sort of briefly give us or tell the viewers about this story of yours and share it with us?
Yeah, so at Caracas Lighthouse, I was on duty in the morning. It was still dark, it was 10 to 6. And a refugee boat came in the distance, about 200 metres out from sea. Suddenly they turned the lights on and the mobile phones on. But the lighthouse is quite a dangerous place to land, and it hit the rocks below the sea, which burst the boat and capsized it.
Yes.
All 35 people ended up in the water. I went running down, zipped my wetsuit up and went swimming out to help people. I first came across a family with a little baby amongst them, all huddled together in the life jackets. I dragged them back to the shoreline, and I turned back round and swam back out, weaving in and out of people as I was going. But I could hear one woman in particular. She was screaming in a way that the other people weren't screaming. The other people were panicking and frightened, but this one particular voice I could hear and pick out, and this woman had lost her baby in the sea, basically.
Yeah, devastating.
So as I swam out, I got about 50 metres out. I came across the woman, and I was pointed to further out to sea by a guy that was next to her, and they're shouting, "Baby, baby, baby." So I swam out another 20 metres, and the first thing I came across was like a sea of bags and life jackets out there. And the very first one that I came across was a baby. It was face down in the water. So I turned it over, and its eyes were in the back of its head. It was not breathing. So I put the baby on my chest and I backstroked back to the shore. Had to weave in and out of the people on the way. After maybe 10 metres, I realised I could maybe press with one hand while I was pulling the water with the other hand. The rest of the team came down. There's quite an international team, but one of the Dutch guys, a guy called Joost, was heading towards me, and I could hear people shouting, "He's got the baby, he's got a baby." And I put my foot down. I could feel a rock underneath my feet. And as a medic, they teach you to give 5 rescue breaths to children. I went to do that, and after the second rescue breath, the baby sicked up the water and started crying. Yeah, so
amazing. That's amazing.
it was quite an intense.
Yeah, I can
thing.
imagine. Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, we're talking about Lesbos here. It's an island where most of the refugees tend to sort of seek shelter and help. What's it like? If you want to sort of describe to our viewers, what is Lesbos like in terms of the camps and the number of refugees that come to it?
Well, Lesbos, it's not like every day. Every day is changing. We have a lot of camps, not really a lot, but we have I would say 5 main camps.
Yes.
Now it's only 3.
Yeah.
Because they, not, a week ago they closed the Oxy camp, what was a short transit camp in the north for the people coming from Olivos or Eftalu.
Yeah.
We have, well, mainly it's Karatepe and Moria camp. What are the big camps in Lesbos?
Yes.
They can host, or they already have hosted,
Yeah.
more than 10,000 people both together. And well, 3 days ago we had very few refugees. It depends. There is
Yeah.
no rules.
Yeah.
It depends on the sea, on the Turkish authorities also, or Frontex when they are patrolling. So there is no rules.
Okay. Well, actually, with me on the phone is Hanan Al-Ashik. Hanan is actually a psychotherapist. She specializes in psychology, and she's based here in London. And she kindly sort of agreed to join us. So welcome to the show, Hanan. I'm sorry to have kept you.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Fred, Brendan, Diane. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Hanan. Hanan, what mental conditions would vulnerable women suffer from, especially those that tend to arrive to sort of camps like Moira in Lesbos, or you know, sort of any camp in Europe? What sort of mental conditions do they suffer from normally, and what therapeutic treatment can someone like yourself, or you know, someone of your speciality, can offer to them?
Well, no one has a syllabus of knowing how to deal with ongoing trauma. Most people don't have to deal with these kind of situations and the scenes that these people have had to see. So I think the highest percentage that has been reported by studies that have been done by the UNHCR or by the University of Columbia, they're looking at refugees in camps in Jordan and in Lebanon and along the way. And the biggest, I think, would be post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and panic disorder. These are the things that the most ones that have been reported, and they reported that around 30% of Syrian refugees, this was looking into Syrian refugees, experience clinical depression, 50% experiencing PTSD. Those are really high numbers. Normally you would see PTSD in a normal population of about 12%. 5 to 12%. So things like that, depression, PTSD, panic disorder, anxiety. Also, you see things on the longer run, like OCD, eating disorders, dissociative disorders like personality split. These are the kind of things that you'd see. And to work with people like this, it would need to be long-term, so it would need to be psychotherapy. I mean, I work in cognitive behavioral therapy treatment, and that's more short-term. But with people that have suffered with this kind of trauma, they would need more long-term treatment, and it would need to involve, you know, psychotherapy. It would need to be culturally and religiously sensitive, also, because you can't get a psychotherapist that knows nothing about these people's religion and their culture, and then expect him to treat them for PTSD, because there are some things that the practitioner might not understand. So I think that the UNHCR and other organizations that are looking into people, these kind of statistics and these people, well, I don't want to call them statistics, but that are doing research into these populations, they're looking for long-term treatments, psychotherapy, maybe short bursts of cognitive behavioral therapy, but mostly working on trust, and working on culturally and religiously sensitive therapies. So that would be the main thing, really.
Okay. And what about the children, the traumatized children that arrive to these camps with their mothers? How do you actually, would you describe their condition normally, especially when they've been tormented and sort of witnessed, you know, the trauma of trying to, you know, cross the sea and get to try and find safety and so on? So what's their state of mind?
Well, children, it's more tricky with children, because with adult populations, normally adults have developed coping mechanisms for everyday things that they see. Again, it wouldn't be civil war or ongoing trauma like these refugees would have seen. But with children, they still haven't developed a stable base, which normally they'd get in a normal family home, and they wouldn't have developed coping mechanisms to cope with any of these horrendous, horrible things that they see, like death, explosions, things like that. So unfortunately with children, you might see more of PTSD and more of dissociative disorders like split personality, because with children, I mean, in my experience, when children experience trauma, normally they block it out, and that would be a split in a personality. So you'd have children that suffer from sleep disorders, blackouts, and you'd see a high percentage, and this is backed up by the literature, of PTSD. So children would need a lot more work, and it would be around trust issues, and it would be around normal, regular, everyday things like falling asleep and not linking the dark, not linking a sound with a kind of mania that they may have. So with children, they would need more attention, and it need to be long term.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But what about children that are born in wars or refugee camps? What does the future hold for them in an unfamiliar land, would you say?
Well, again, I mean, children that there is a difference, obviously, between children that were in a normal environment and then transferred to this unstable, scary environment. But children that are born in refugee camps wouldn't really receive much of a stable base from their parents, because their parents wouldn't be functioning normally. They would be scared. They would be constantly anxious. I mean, from the little experience that I had in the jungle in Calais, the families that I saw and the units that I saw and the newborns that I saw, they weren't in a normal situation. So they wouldn't be able to grow up with a stable base. So they would not be functioning members of society without ongoing support.
Right.
So that they could function in society in the future. But they would need a lot more support again. I mean, younger generations do need a lot more support than adults, not taking away from the loss that these mothers or adult refugees have sustained.
Right, right, okay. And if you were to summarize, sort of the welfare of these women that sort of are refugees and that arrive to Europe, how would you summarize their welfare state of mind and
their state of mind?
Yes.
Well, I mean, these women have been through displacement, instability. I mean, a lot of them have been victims, unfortunately, of sexual assault from people along the way. I mean, a lot of people imagine that these refugees' journeys start on the coast of Turkey. That's not true. I mean, I've heard stories from people that they've been on the road for more than 18 months. You have women that have been vulnerable to sexual assault. You've had women whose children have had to watch their children go through these kind of things. So if I were to summarize their state of mind, I mean, I would say that at this time they appear to be very apathetic and very panicked and anxious. But I mean, there are organizations like the Center in Berlin for Vulnerable Women and Children, places like that are specifically targeting women and children that have been through this kind of assault, and they're trying to do psychotherapy, hypnotherapy to try and help them manage this angst and manage this fear. So I am optimistic about the future once the refugees reach a safe haven, not so much on the way.
Yeah. Well, apparently, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently the smugglers are actually sort of using women as means of, sort of replacing money or payment for them to actually be able to cross, to Europe, apparently. So that's another thing I've been reading about, and in New York Times, about how, smugglers have been sort of bargaining with the husbands about, sort of using and abusing the women in order for them to be able to, go on board their boats and cross the other side to Europe. So I'm sure that's another thing to deal with women traumatized in that way.
Of course. I mean, that is correct. There's Dr. Suzanne Hoon, who is one of the main psychologists in the Center at Berlin that focuses on women and children. And there was that article in the New York Times that was talking about that payment once some of these people are robbed of money along the way, because there is no protection for them. And so, yes, I mean, we've read about stories where husbands give their wives up for payment.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of break in structure of safety and break in structure of trust that makes it difficult for people to become functional members of society in the future when they do arrive to Germany or the United Kingdom or wherever it is that they're trying to reach to join family or start over.
Yeah.
It is very sad, and it is something that will break trust and needs a lot of psychotherapy. Also, these women, I mean, people that I saw, can't go through the stages of bereavement. I mean, I've met women that have lost husbands, some that have unfortunately lost children or are unsure about their fate. And that's the largest stressor, but they can't go through the stages of bereavement because of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. They can't go through these normal stages of bereavement that a normal person would go through because it's interrupted by trauma and fear and angst and panic.
Yes.
So these things wouldn't help a child grow up in that environment because there is no structure.
Well, thank you so much, Hanan Lashik, for joining us today at such short notice. You've been great. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred, could you please describe to our viewers the state of the Syrian refugees or Syrian women refugees when they arrive to the island of Lesbos? Because we're trying to sort of focus, obviously, on that category.
Well, the state of the women refugees when they arrive in Lesbos, the Syrian and Iraqis, they are brought to Karatepe. It's the war refugee camp where we host only families, so a large amount of women and children. The camp is not bad. Karatepe is a good camp. It changed a lot since a couple of months. Now we provide more or less all services that could be provided in a camp. Okay, we would need a laundry, for example, because the women they have in charge the laundry. It's obvious, and they need some facilities in order to keep the family clean, and maybe the shelters also. So it's what we need. Also, we have big problems with the breastfeeding. Because the UNICEF guidelines say that it's not allowed to distribute powdered milk, for example, to women with small infants less than 1 year. The problem is the Syrian women have the same standard as in Europe. So it is not applicable for the Syrian, for example.
Right.
It's not Africa, it's totally different. So we have some issue with it. Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctor Without Borders, distribute hot water, for example, for this mother. We are not allowed to distribute water.
Right.
So sometimes they take the cold water from the tap, and they mix the milk in it. So we have over mortality of 44% of the small children by refugees because of this. So it's a big issue. I think.
Right. I see. Brendan, can you tell us about the Dunkirk refugee camp, because that's the one in France that homes for almost 3,000 refugees. You've explained to me that it's a place that no one can imagine how dire it is. So would you like to give us more of an idea of what's it like?
Yeah, I'm not the best person to speak to about the Dunkirk camp. I've been there a couple of times. It's absolute dire, the conditions there. It's just a sea of mud and tents. And there are about 3,000 people living there. I think there's about 300 children. And they've completely lost hope. They're sat there with nothing, they've got nowhere to go, they're trapped, and they've reached the end of the line. And they're sat living in these tents, trying to raise their families with no education, no health care, and nobody really looking after them. The governments seem to have forgotten about them.
Apparently, the local mayor, and this is for both of you actually, the local mayor says that these migrants deserve a minimum of human dignity. Is this the sort of attitude you'd expect from a politician? When faced with a problem like this, a catastrophe like that?
Well, I'm not aware of this sentences, so I don't know. The mayor, for example, of Mytilene is a very good mayor. He's helping a lot. Well, Greece has not enough money for this large amount of refugees. We have, for example, in 2015, more than 500,000 refugees in Lesbos only.
Right.
So imagine it's a lot like 700,000 for all Greece. Greece has a lot of economic problems. If he's speaking of dignity, I don't know, but he's helping a lot, and maybe it's what he wanted to say with dignity.
Yes.
Yeah, no, really, I have no idea.
Well, that's what I actually got sort of from watching one of the sort of documentaries. I think it was one of the channels in the British channels. Well, if we wanted to sort of go back to sort of how to reach Greece and the shores of Lesbos, does the arduous odyssey faced by people fleeing conflict end on these shores, or what happens after? So when you get to the Greek shores, what happens after?
So is this me?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you work on the.
Yeah. So the journey when they obviously arrive in the Greek shores, they come to Lesbos, and then they go through the camps, and then they work their way through Europe, through Greece, Idomeni, into Macedonia, and through the Balkans.
Right.
And then they reach their journeys on the way, and often on the way, these people are very vulnerable. And in the camps, there are huge safety concerns as they go along, and their final destinations too. And right the way from the start of the journey, right the way to the end of the journey, they're exploited at every single turn, which is incredibly sad. They're given the life jackets. I examined lots of life jackets on.
Yeah, I was going to come to that actually, because we've heard that there was a lot of media coverage about the life jackets and how they were all sort of rubbish and fake, and they weren't even life jackets.
I looked at lots of these life jackets, and I didn't see a real one, not one. No. Life jackets with writing on them, with real pidgin English written on them, with safety standards saying that they're not for use in the sea. Children's life jackets. I took children out to sea with life jackets that are deflated on one side. And there's people in Turkey selling these people, selling these children
they're selling
life
them for,
jackets.
because apparently the smugglers are actually asking for a certain amount of money before they actually get them on the boat. But the minute they arrive to the shores, they ask them for extra just to buy these life jackets, which apparently, obviously, they're not even meeting sort of safety standards or. For them to be able to use.
They're exploited at every turn. If you just talk about the journey over, you can get a cheap ticket. And I don't know if you've heard about this, but you can get a cheap ticket if there's stormy conditions. So the smugglers will reduce the price for you to increase your chance of.
And we're talking about women, children, and the elderly, and
they don't
going
care.
through all of
they
this.
They don't care who you are.
One of the sort of colleagues of yours, I think that works with Lighthouse Relief, she was saying that coming or arriving to Lesbos is like a transitory sort of period where they arrive, they're given sort of all the necessary food and shelter and so on for a minimum period of time, and then they're allowed to carry on. But some women and children tend to walk for miles and miles and miles until they get to their destination or wherever it is afterwards. So is that the case?
What kind of destination?
So we're talking about sort of moving on to the centre.
So when they arrive, it was the fact 6 months ago. Now it's more the fact. It's very well organized now.
Oh, it's okay.
Since the refugees tend to come now from the east. No more, not really from Assos or. Baba Calais, it was in summer the fact, in October also, but since the new regulation, Turkey-Europe, the Turkish authorities are more aware of where the people are living. So the smugglers had to find another way, and they find it obviously because from Izmir it's closer to go to Ayvalık, so it's 180 kilometers, like 80 kilometers coast. Where you can put a boat with 50 refugees on the sea and send them to Turkey. Okay, the distance it's longer. The way is 20 kilometers now. It was 9 kilometers before, so it's double times, like 3 hours, to reach safely or not the Greek coast. But yes, it is the journey begins. Not really in Turkey. It begins very far away from Turkey, from Syria.
Yeah. Also joining us on the phone is Sinead Williams. Sinead is a trainee lawyer, but also a volunteer with food distribution with CalAid. Welcome to the show, Sinead.
Hello. Thanks
Hello
for having
there.
me.
Hi. Now you volunteer at the so-called jungle camp in Calais, helping to distribute food and donations to thousands of refugees that are living out there. Could you tell us why is it quoted as the jungle camp, and in what condition do the refugees live in out there when the crisis all started, especially Syrian women and children?
The jungle camp's been in existence for over 10 years now. I think it started off as just a couple of hundred of people trying to get across from France to the UK. But it's grown in the last year, even since last summer, to over 7,000 people. And refugees are living in completely squalid conditions. It's essentially a slum or a shanty town. People are living in tents. Some have some basic structures made out of wood that organisations like CalAid have provided to them. But there's women and children living in tents in northern France in very cold conditions. It's not a very it's not a particularly safe environment because of the high amount of police cause a lot of tension there, and it's just kind of something CalAid and a French organisation called Auberge des Migrants do. It's just try to keep people alive and as comfortable as possible on a day-to-day basis, but it's very difficult because there's growing numbers of people arriving in the camp every day.
I see. I mean, one volunteer described the jungle as an obscene level of suffering on our doorstep and in one of the world's most prosperous countries. And yet no one accepts responsibility. The UN is not in the jungle, and so therefore neither are the main aid agencies. And yet conditions fall short of basic UN humanitarian sort of standards. Why are they getting away with it? Why is this happening?
I think the problem is that the UN doesn't have a mandate to work in France, and the French government haven't declared the camp in Calais an official refugee camp. So the UN has actually got no power to come in and help. The Red Cross are quite noticeably absent. I'm not sure if it's the same situation with them, but they used to run the refugee camp near Calais in Sangatte until it was closed down a number of years ago. And the only large international organisations that are there at the moment are Médecins Sans Frontières, and they are helping a lot with medical help and with the sanitation in the camp, because it's just portaloos and not enough of them being used by over 7,000 people. So it's quite difficult to keep the place clean and with some degree of sanitation to keep people healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you organise donations and distribute them, especially for the vulnerable and the needy?
Well, I worked in the warehouse that's rented by a number of charities, and all the donations come through there. The system they were working with before Christmas was that all of the donations for women and children were sent to a specific women and children's centre within the camp, and there were days during the week where women would come specifically to get what they needed. For men, it was more of distribution, literally from the back of a van. People would just have to line up when they saw the van come, and they wouldn't even know what was being given out, because we could only give out what we had enough of, and we never knew if we were going to have enough shoes or coats or food to give out. So it was kind of just the luck of the draw. Whatever we arrived with, if you happened to be in the area, we would give you stuff. Now they've moved to a different system for distributing stuff, in that they're getting the people within the different communities, the Syrian community, the Afghan community, the Iranian community, involved in the distribution, because the sort of leaders of the communities know what their people need and who's the most vulnerable. So they're being worked with at the moment, and they're kind of in charge of distributing to their own communities within the camp.
In the Daily Mail this morning, there was an article about how units recycled into rooms are set to house 1,500 migrants. Do you think that will actually sort of try to de-escalate or sort of make the matters a bit less worse, or maybe help out?
It's an interesting question, because on the one hand, it'll be better conditions for the people living there, but on the other hand, it's the French authorities just putting all of their responsibility on the back burner. If they concentrate on doing this, they don't have to deal with the fact that there's 7,000 people who are completely undocumented in Europe, who have no rights and no help being given to them legally. So they would be much better off going into the camp and giving people legal advice on claiming asylum and trying to persuade them to stop trying to get to the UK and persuade them that they should stay in France, and that France will actually give them a safe environment to live in, because quite a lot of people have been really discouraged and put off staying in France by the behaviour that they've witnessed so far from the French authorities.
I mean, Fred and Brendan, what do you think? What's your views about this? Do you think this will help to sort of solve the problem, solve the issue by actually sort of building these little homes and saying, yeah, there you go, you know, that's sorted. But then it's not going to be able to house every single refugee there. It's
a sticking plaster. It's a sticking plaster for a big wound that's bleeding profusely everywhere. And it's clearly not what's required. What's required is a systematic approach where the governments work together. The UK government, along with the French government, work together on as to decide if these people are entitled to an asylum claim. These people are forced to do an incredibly dangerous journey, jumping onto trains and climbing into the back of lorries. 15-year-old boy died the other day in Europe, and it's not in the news. And these people are forced into a situation where they aren't entitled to an asylum claim into the UK until they get into the UK. So how are they supposed to get into the UK without a system in place to do that? They're being dropped in a complete no man's land, and it's just such a travesty for them, because they're left now, having left their homes, left the wars, and left all the people and all the possessions and everything that they ever had. They've took the most perilous of journeys, and they've been through exploitation at every single level. And they arrive in northern France, and they're living in mud. And not enough people care about it. Our government certainly don't.
Right, what do you think, Fred? What's
I think definitely it's a problem, it's a British problem. Because the French government were okay to accept a big amount of refugees. Unfortunately, these refugees, they want to go to Great Britain because they have families also here sometimes, and they are more they are more willing to join England or whatever. So I think it's your problem. It's a British problem.
British
yes,
problem.
yes.
Yeah. Well, Sinead Williams, thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate you sort of waiting for us today as well. So apologies for that. But no, thank you so much for joining us today, and it's been a great pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fred, the whole world has misconceptions of what these refugees, especially the women and children, really are. How would you change them, and what would you say? How would you change these misconceptions?
This misconception, I'm not sure I understand clearly the question. So if
the misconceptions about these women refugees, meaning that they've come obviously to Europe to have a better life, to seek a better, so these misconceptions are normally sort of made, from normal people in the streets. How would we be able to change that? Obviously, because you've got the first-hand experience of dealing with them.
Sure. The misconception is because some of them don't have any idea what they can expect when they come in Europe. My camp, the Karatepe camp, is only for Syrian and Iraqis people, so there is not this kind of misconception. Actually, it will be more for Moria, where we can find a lot of Afghanis families, and they have really no idea of what they can have in Europe. The Syrian and Iraqis families have families in Europe already. The people who come to Europe know what will happen. They have no misconception. It is for Moria the fact, definitely, I'm sure. It is very bad and very tough for them because most of them, they won't have the asylum right, and they would have to go back to their country. So, yes, but our refugees in Galatepe are eligible for the asylum, so it will be different.
It'll be different,
We have
yeah.
really to compare the two
yeah.
situations. They are absolutely not the same.
Now, final question for both of you, actually, so that we can end today's show. Europe's refugee crisis is threatening to compound a hidden problem of statelessness. Okay, with experts warning that growing numbers of children are part of an emerging stateless generation. What's your views about this, about being stateless generation? Brendan?
Well, it's again, it's a question that I'm a bit unsure where you're coming from. I do see I've seen a lot of children coming through these camps, and I do see I've seen children cowering from helicopters ahead, suffering with PTSD, and then they arrive they go through all their journey and they arrive in France or in Germany or Sweden or wherever they are, and they have no education. Who's providing their education, their health, their welfare? Who's looking after their well-being? It's small organisations, the solidarity groups, the CalAid. It's these small, individually run organisations that are going out and looking after these people, and that's not right. It's not fair on these people, these children, and families, to have nobody provide them with, a simple thing such as education. They've got nothing. So, I just think it's an incredibly sad indictment on ourselves that we can have a world that looks at them as if they've got nothing and they've got no rights.
And they have got nothing at the moment. They have, yeah.
They have nothing,
yeah.
no. But in some countries like Germany or Sweden or Norway, these children are taken in charge by the authorities. They get education, courses, and they can be integrated not very easily, but they can be integrated easily, easier than the rest of the family. We have 34% of children coming in Lesbos, for example. 20% are women. So it's a large part of the people coming, but the children are. It's easier, definitely. If you want to educate small children, you can get it. Older people, it's difficult. It will be difficult. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our show, unfortunately, and it's sad because we can carry on, but unfortunately we have to end it. And I would like to thank my studio guests, Fred Morley and Brendan Woodhouse, for joining us today and for sharing your heroic experiences with us. Thank you also to my guests that were with me on the phone. A big thank you goes to the woman behind all of this who's managed to put me in touch with my guest today. It's Hanan Alashik, who actually joined us today. So without Hanan, I think the show wouldn't have been complete. So thank you to Hanan. Now, while every refugee's story is different and their anguish personal, they all share a common thread of uncommon courage. The courage not only to survive, but to persevere and rebuild their shattered lives, especially those that are victims of trafficking, rape, prostitution and abuse. A quote I would like to share with you. When things fall apart, the children of the land scurry and scatter like birds escaping a burning sky. They will never be the same again, because you cannot be the same once you leave behind who and what you are. You just cannot be the same. Look at them leaving in droves, despite knowing they will be welcomed with restraint in no strange lands, because they do not belong. We can do more to help these children. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.